Sure. Here's a rewritten version of the first idea in a more natural American English style. Daniel was born in a remote village deep in Africa, a place where tradition held a powerful grip over the people. From the moment he was born, his life was intertwined with the village's customs. As the firstborn son of Madame Veronica, Daniel was expected to follow a long-standing tradition in their community. The first son of every family was to become a Catholic priest. This was more than just a family expectation. It was a deeply rooted belief that this path would bring blessings, peace, and prosperity to the entire household. For Madame Veronica, this was a dream she held close to her heart. She envisioned herself as the proud mother of a respected priest, someone who would earn the admiration of the village women. She could already picture the gatherings where the other women would sing her praises, acknowledging her son as a holy man destined for greatness. But Daniel was different. From a young age, he was charming, lively, and full of energy. He had the kind of looks that made women take notice, eyes that seemed to see right through you, a smile that lit up the entire village, and a voice that could soften even the hardest hearts. He knew the effect he had on the people around him, especially the women, and it wasn't long before he became the center of attention. The girls his age admired him, whispering about him when he walked by, but it wasn't their attention that captured his interest. Daniel was drawn to the married women in the village. He found something fascinating about them, their maturity, their grace, and the life experience that young girls simply didn't have. He considered them more than just attractive. They were his spect, a term he used with a mischievous grin to describe his attraction to them. Madame Veronica, a proud and determined woman who had raised Daniel alone after his husband's passing, saw her son's refusal to become a priest as a personal failure. She had sacrificed so much to raise him and was desperate to see him follow the village's tradition. At the age of 16, she began urging him to enter the seminary. It was her deepest wish that Daniel would become a priest, not only for the honor it would bring her, but for the blessings it was believed to bring to their family. However, Daniel wasn't ready to give up the pleasures of life. The thought of a life of celibacy, of denying himself the joys of the world, was the farthest thing from his mind. Instead, he wanted to enjoy his youth, especially the company of women. Certainly. Here's the rewritten paragraph in a more natural American English style for idea 2. Daniel was no ordinary young man in his village. With his good looks, magnetic personality, and undeniable charm, he quickly became the center of attention. From a young age, he knew he was handsome, and the girls in the village made sure to let him know it. They giggled whenever he passed by, whispering about his smile and the way his eyes seemed to see right through them. It wasn't just the girls his age who took notice, though. Daniel had a unique kind of appeal that seemed to draw the attention of older, married women. While most young men his age were enamored with their peers, Daniel found himself captivated by women who had already experienced life, women with a certain grace and maturity that younger girls just didn't possess. To him, they weren't just attractive. They were something more. His attraction to them wasn't just about physical beauty. It was about the kind of life experience that made them stand out. This fascination with married women became more than just a passing interest. He would often spend time with them, enjoying the company of women who were older, wiser, and more experienced. They, in turn, were drawn to his charm, his smooth talk, and the way he seemed to understand them in ways their husbands did not. While other young men were still figuring out their place in the world, Daniel already had the confidence to know exactly how to captivate the women around him. But this desire would bring trouble in the years to come, as it set him on a path that would lead to deceit, scandal, and ultimately, destruction. Daniel's mother, Madame Veronica, couldn't understand why her son wasn't interested in the path she had so carefully planned for him. She had dreams of seeing him become a Catholic priest, to bring honor to their family and to earn the respect of the entire village. But Daniel wasn't interested in religious life. He wasn't ready to give up the pleasures that came with youth, especially the pleasure of being admired by women. The pressure to become a priest mounted, but Daniel resisted, wanting to hold on to the life he enjoyed. As his mother urged him more and more to enter the seminary, Daniel found himself torn between his own desires and the expectations of his family and village. He knew he was supposed to follow in the footsteps of his ancestors, but the temptation of the world around him was far more appealing. Of course, here's a rewritten version of the third idea in a more natural American English style. Madame Veronica was a strong and determined woman. She had raised Daniel alone after her husband passed away when Daniel was just a boy. In their village, where tradition ran deep, she knew that her son had a significant role to play. Being the firstborn, Daniel was expected to follow the long-standing village tradition, to become a Catholic priest. This wasn't just a family wish, it was considered a sacred duty. The community believed that the first son of every family who became a priest would bring blessings and prosperity not just to his family but to the entire village. It was a powerful tradition, and one that Madame Veronica held close to her heart. She envisioned herself proudly standing beside other village women, her head held high as they admired her for raising a son who had chosen the holy life. She imagined herself being praised in the village gatherings, a respected matriarch known for being the mother of a reverend father. For her, Daniel's decision to follow this path was more than just a personal choice. It was a matter of family honor and tradition. She believed that fulfilling this role would elevate her family in the eyes of the village, cementing her place of respect and admiration. But Daniel was not like other young men in the village. From a young age, he had shown little interest in religious life. He was charming, energetic, and full of life, and his ambitions lay elsewhere. While other boys his age were focused on their future in the community, Daniel couldn't shake the allure of the world outside the confines of the seminary. The idea of living a celibate life, dedicating himself fully to the service of God, felt like a prison to him. He enjoyed life too much, especially the company of women. The thought of giving up everything he enjoyed, all the pleasures of youth, seemed impossible. Despite his mother's constant urging, Daniel resisted. Madame Veronica could see the disappointment in her son's eyes whenever she mentioned the seminary. She tried to understand his hesitation, but for her, it wasn't just a matter of personal choice. It was a matter of faith and duty. As she saw it, the whole village was watching, and if Daniel refused to follow the tradition, it would bring shame on their family. She couldn't bear the thought of losing her position of respect among the women in the village. She saw the whispers, the subtle distancing from her, and she felt the pressure mounting with every passing day. Certainly, here's a rewritten version of the fourth idea in a natural American English style. Despite his mother's pressure and the weight of tradition bearing down on him, Daniel still wasn't ready to fully commit to the life of a priest. He continued to delay the inevitable, dragging his feet whenever the subject came up. For Madame Veronica, each passing day without her son entering the seminary was a personal blow. She had dreams of being recognized as the mother of a priest, and as the weeks turned into months, the community's whispers began to grow louder. The other women in the village, once her friends and admirers, started to treat her differently. They lowered their voices when she walked by, casting furtive glances her way, a clear sign of their disapproval. Some of them even began to mock her, quietly whispering about how her son had rejected the sacred path that was meant to bring honor to their family. It wasn't just the gossip that stung. Madame Veronica could feel the weight of being excluded from the village women's gatherings. She had once been at the center of those meetings, held in high esteem for raising a son who would eventually become a priest. But now, with each passing day, that respect was slipping through her fingers. The other women avoided her, and the leaders of the village women's group made it clear that until Daniel entered the seminary, she would no longer be welcome in their meetings. This social exile was unbearable for Madame Veronica. She had invested so much of her heart and soul into her son, hoping that he would fulfill the role she had envisioned for him. To watch as her position in the village eroded because of his refusal was too much to bear. Finally, unable to endure the shame any longer, Madame Veronica sat Daniel down one evening after a long day at the market. Her voice was heavy with sorrow, and the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. She told him, "My son, do you see how they treat me now? Do you see how they talk behind my back? This isn't just about you, Daniel. It's about our family's honor. Please, for the sake of our family, go to the seminary. Make me proud. I can't bear this humiliation any longer." Daniel saw the tears in his mother's eyes, and for the first time, guilt began to tug at his conscience. He knew how much she had sacrificed for him, how much she longed to see him fulfill the family's duty. Reluctantly, he agreed to enter the seminary. It wasn't because he felt a divine calling, but because he couldn't stand to see his mother suffer any longer. However, deep down, Daniel still had no intention of following the path of the priesthood. For him, it was just a way to end the pressure from his mother and restore some peace in the village. Certainly. Here's the rewritten version of the fifth idea in a natural American English style. Once Daniel finally agreed to enter the seminary, the news spread like wildfire throughout the village. Madame Veronica's pride was restored almost instantly. The women who had once turned their backs on her now greeted her warmly again, offering their congratulations as they celebrated the fact that her son had decided to follow the traditional path. Daniel's decision to join the seminary was seen as a victory for her, a triumph over the whispers and mockery that had plagued her for so long. The village women who had once distanced themselves from her now showered her with praise, calling her the blessed mother of a future priest. Madame Veronica, basking in the admiration of others, regained her place in the village women's meetings, a position she had nearly lost. For a while, she allowed herself to believe that the years of pressure had finally paid off. But while Madame Veronica was basking in her restored respect, Daniel's heart was far from committed to the religious life. He had entered the seminary not out of any sense of calling, but to please his mother and end the endless pressure. Deep down, he had no intention of dedicating his life to God. His thoughts often wandered back to the world he was leaving behind, the world of freedom, excitement, and most of all, the company of women. He knew that his mother's dream for him had come true, but it didn't change the fact that he had no interest in becoming a priest. In fact, the more he lived in the seminary, the more he resented the idea of celibacy and the strict expectations that came with it. Daniel didn't give up his old ways entirely. On weekends, he found excuses to leave the seminary, visiting sick relatives, attending family events, anything that would allow him to sneak back to the village and indulge in the pleasures he missed so much. His charm had not faded. In fact, it had only grown stronger, and he continued to rekindle old relationships, particularly with the married women who still admired him. To Daniel, the game had become even more thrilling because it was forbidden. The more he engaged in these secret liaisons, the more he wanted them. He found himself balancing his life as a seminarian, going through the motions during the week, while living a completely different life on the weekends. Certainly. Here's a rewritten version of the sixth idea in natural American English style. As Daniel's time at the seminary progressed, his life became an increasingly complicated balancing act. On the outside, he was the picture of a devoted future priest, attending classes, learning prayers, and taking part in all the religious rituals that came with the training. But in his heart, Daniel knew that he wasn't fully invested in the life that was being laid out for him. He continued to play the role of a pious student, keeping up appearances to satisfy his mother and avoid further gossip in the village. But beneath the surface, his desires were growing stronger, and the pull of the life he had left behind was hard to ignore. Every weekend, Daniel found ways to escape the confines of the seminary. He would make up excuses, visiting sick relatives, attending family events, anything that would allow him to slip away from the rigorous schedule of the seminary and return to the village. It was there, in the familiarity of his old life, that he could indulge his cravings for the company of women, particularly married ones. It wasn't just the thrill of sneaking around that excited him. It was the sense of power he felt knowing that he could have whatever he wanted, regardless of the consequences. Among the married women in the village, Daniel had two that stood out to him more than the others. The first was Cecilia, a mother of three who often came to church, looking weary and worn from the struggles of daily life. Her husband was often away, working as a trader, leaving her alone for days at a time. The second was Grace, a trader herself, known for her beauty and sharp tongue. Grace was confident and independent, but there was something about Daniel that made her soften whenever he was around. Both women were looking for something more than what their marriages provided, and Daniel knew just how to feed that hunger. He began to craft his plan, using his position as a priest to get close to them. He knew that publicly pursuing these women would be scandalous and ruin his carefully cultivated image, so he took his time, moving slowly and subtly. He started by offering extra prayers for them during Mass, mentioning their names as examples of virtuous women in his sermons. He made them feel special, as if their connection to him was something sacred, something that made them closer to God. It didn't take long before both women fell under his spell. Cecilia was the first to fully succumb to his charm. Her life had been filled with routine and hardship, and when Daniel offered her an escape in the form of comforting conversations and shared moments, she couldn't resist. They would spend hours together at the church, and gradually, their talks shifted from spiritual matters to personal confessions. She shared her struggles with her husband, her loneliness, and her desire for something more. One evening, after a particular long conversation, Cecilia broke down in tears, and Daniel moved in closer to comfort her. What started as a comforting embrace quickly escalated into something else entirely. That night marked the beginning of their secret affair. Certainly, Here's the rewritten version of the seventh idea in a natural American English style. As Daniel's manipulations with Cecilia deepened, another woman in the village, Grace, became his next target. Grace was different from Cecilia in many ways. While Cecilia was softer, more vulnerable, and worn down by the demands of motherhood, Grace was sharp, confident, and independent. She wasn't easily swayed by anyone, let alone a priest, but that only intrigued Daniel more. He found her strong, self-assured personality a challenge, and he loved proving to himself that he could win her over too. Daniel took a different approach with Grace. He didn't need to make her feel sorry for herself the way he had with Cecilia. Instead, he played on her ego. He complimented her beauty and intelligence, telling her that she deserved more than what her husband could provide. He convinced her that she was special, that she was destined for something greater. This attention, this flattery, worked wonders on Grace. She began to see Daniel not just as a priest, but as someone who understood her on a deeper level. His words made her feel seen, appreciated in a way that her husband, who was often too caught up in his business to notice her, never did. At first, their conversations were innocent, centered around spiritual matters after church services, but Daniel's subtle manipulations soon shifted the tone. He would linger after Mass, offering her private counsel, speaking to her in a way that no one else did. He made her feel important, like she was someone worthy of special attention. His compliments became more personal, more intimate, and gradually, Grace found herself longing for the attention he gave her. What started as innocent conversations became late-night visits to discuss spiritual matters, but in reality it was Daniel working his charm, drawing her deeper into his web. Over time, the connection between them grew stronger, though Daniel continued to play the part of the devoted priest. He knew how to hide behind the image of a man of God, pillar of virtue, while secretly leading a double life. Grace, who had always been independent and proud, began to see their bond as something special, even sacred. She was convinced that their connection was more than just an affair, it was almost divine. To her, Daniel was a man chosen by God to lead her, even if their relationship was shrouded in sin. Daniel's manipulation worked perfectly, as he continued to string both women along, feeding their desires and making them believe that they were the ones who were special to him. But for Daniel, it wasn't about love or connection, it was about control. The more he pulled Grace and Cecilia into his world, the more power he had over them, and the more dangerous his game became. Despite the thrill of the forbidden, he knew he was playing a dangerous game, one that could eventually unravel. But for now, he basked in the excitement, the secrecy, and the power that came with it. Certainly. Here's the rewritten version of the eighth idea, along with a meaningful conclusion and lesson drawn from the story, in a natural American English style. As the months passed, Daniel's web of deceit grew ever tighter. His affair with Cecilia deepened, and his manipulations with Grace continued to unfold, but eventually, the consequences of his actions began to emerge. The moment Daniel had always feared came when Cecilia discovered she was pregnant. The news sent shockwaves through her, and for the first time, she realized that her secret affair with the priest could no longer be hidden. Desperate and terrified, she turned to Daniel, hoping he would take responsibility, but his response was cold and ruthless. He flatly denied being the father and insisted that she get rid of the baby. He saw the pregnancy as nothing more than a complication, a potential threat to his carefully constructed life. Cecilia, devastated by his cruelty, refused to comply with his demands. Instead, she made the painful decision to keep the child even if it meant ruining her life. Cecilia's choice to keep the pregnancy led her down a path of despair. With her marriage already strained and the shame of her secret hanging over her, she found herself increasingly isolated. Unable to live with the guilt and pressure, she sought out dangerous remedies in an attempt to end the pregnancy. Tragically, this decision led to her death. The miscarriage, brought on by the harmful herbs, left her family shattered and the village in shock. The whispers and suspicions about Daniel grew louder, but he remained confident that his secrets would remain hidden. But as with all lies, the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully concealed. In the aftermath of Cecilia's tragic death, rumors spread like wildfire. People began to piece together the clues, and whispers of Daniel's involvement in her affair and pregnancy grew more persistent. It wasn't long before the community began to question his integrity and his true nature. When Grace, too, discovered she was pregnant, the village was already buzzing with suspicions. Daniel's manipulations became too obvious to ignore, and as the truth slowly came to light, the village's trust in him crumbled. His carefully maintained image as a pious priest dissolved in the face of his actions. Ultimately, Daniel's double life caught up with him. His affair with 2 married women, his manipulation for power, and his betrayal of the very people who trusted him led to his downfall. When the village rose up in fury, burning down his house and the church, Daniel and his mother fled under the cover of darkness, their lives shattered by the very deceit that they had worked so hard to protect. The story of Father Daniel is a cautionary tale that reminds us of the inevitable consequences of dishonesty, betrayal, and selfishness. No matter how skilled we are at hiding the truth or manipulating those around us, the truth always finds its way to the surface. Daniel's desire for power, attention, and pleasure blinded him to the cost of his actions, not only to himself, but to the lives of the people around him. His mother's shame, Cecilia's tragic death, and the destruction of the village's trust in him were the results of his lack of integrity. This story teaches us that living without honesty, respect, and accountability will eventually lead to sorrow, regret, and loss. It's a reminder that the truth always prevails, and in the end, our actions, good or bad, define us far more than any mask we wear.